Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Jon Acuff is the New York Times best-selling author of 5 books, including his most recent, Do-Over, Make Today the First Day of Your New Career. For 19 years, he's helped some of the biggest brands in the world tell their story, including the Home Depot, Bose, Staples, and the Dave Ramsey team. Most recently, he's spoken to hundreds of thousands of people at conferences, colleges, companies, and churches. Featured regularly on national media, Jon has been seen on CNN, Fox News, Good Day LA, and several other key outlets. In addition, Jon is also a big proponent of social media, with blogs that have been read by 4 million people, and he boasts more than 280,000 Twitter followers. In 2010, he used his influence with his tribe to build 2 kindergartens in Vietnam. So with that, I bring you Jon Acuff. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I understand you've been following the NBA playoffs.
I have. I grew up outside of Boston, so I'm a Celtics fan. But I'll tweet about any team, really. I played fantasy basketball this season, so I know more than I usually do.
Yeah, well, I think Boston finished top of the Eastern Conference, and my Phoenix Suns, I think, finished at the very bottom of the Western Conference, so we couldn't be.
How'd you pick the Suns? How does a guy from where you're from choose the Suns?
That's a great question. Well, I got into basketball about 1992, 93, and if you recall, back then Charles Barkley was at the Suns, and they had that stellar season when they went like 62-20 and ended up playing the Bulls in the finals and ultimately losing. And I picked the Suns, and I've stuck by them ever since, which was probably the wrong decision, but hey, I'm a loyal guy, man. What can I say?
Shouldn't you pick like whoever Luke Longley played for, or like somebody like that, right?
Yeah, that would make more sense. And he played for the Bulls when they ended up winning their second three-peat in the midnight. That would have made more sense. So at least I would have tasted success a few times. But hey,
that would have. I'm just pointing that out. That's a good decision. Are there any current Australians in the NBA?
Patty Mills plays in the NBA, so there's a couple of others, but no one really prominent. Well, actually, no. The name escapes me. He's been injured for like the last 6 months. He was at Golden State, big center. Oh man,
Andrew Bogut.
Yes, Andrew Bogut. I can't believe I couldn't.
Yeah.
So, but he's been out of commission for a little while now. Anyway, we can talk about the NBA for a while, but we better change tact, man. You've just released your 5th book, the Do-Over. Not the Do-Over, Do-Over. Make today the first day of your new career. And I know Adam Grant has called this an energetic, user-friendly guide to navigating the jumps, bumps, and ceilings that we all face in our careers. So that's a glowing review from someone like Adam Grant. So congratulations on the release of the book, my man.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. It's been a fun process.
Yeah. Writing's always a very rewarding process. Even if nobody ends up reading what you're writing, it's just so fulfilling.
Well, selling books is impossible.
Yeah.
And it's only getting harder. And the myth of the internet has not proven true that like you can sell anything easily. That's just not true.
Yeah, you can sell anything, but I think the number that you sell compared to what it used to be is much less. So, but
Oh yeah, nobody's opening emails. Like the whole market's upside down right now. It's kind of
mm,
interesting.
um, excellent. So, I mean, what inspired the book, John?
Well, I walked away from what a lot of people thought was a big successful opportunity to go on my own and be an entrepreneur. And so I had my own do-over. And then as I started to talk to other people that I knew, people in my neighborhood, people when I travel and speak, I just realized that career and work is constant transition. And there's good transitions where you get a good opportunity, and then there's bad transitions where something outside your control happens. Like at least in the States, we used to have people at every pharmacy that developed your photos. So about a week ago, we found some disposable cameras, some old cameras in a drawer, and we went and took them to Walgreens, a pharmacy here, and they said, yeah, we have to mail them out. It'll take about a week because they no longer do that. And I just realized there are thousands of camera guys and girls at those pharmacies that lost their jobs when digital photography took over.
Yeah.
So we experienced a transition. And so that's what the book's about. It's about how do you manage transition in the best possible way because it's coming for you.
Yeah, well, I know in the book you talk about a few career ceilings and walls that you encounter, and we'll touch on that in a second. But keen to find out a little bit more about your own personal do-over and what the Jon Acuff story looks like today.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it, I started a blog in 2008 that grew pretty quickly. And through that, I got to write a book. And from that, I got to start speaking. And I kind of started to add all these things on the side of my life. I'm a big believer in the side hustle. I can't speak to Australia, but at least in the States, we are obsessed with just go for it, chase your dream, like the Instagram version of that.
Yeah. Australia is a little bit more. I mean, that is happening here, but I don't think it's as widespread. We're quite.
Well, you don't want to get tall. What is it? Tall poppy syndrome?
Yeah, exactly, man. You clearly, you've been here before, or?
No, I just have a bunch of entrepreneur friends from Australia that talk about the differences between American culture and Australian culture when it comes to success.
Yeah.
Or when it comes to personal branding.
American culture, let's crash and burn and, we'll give it another shot. Australian culture is, well, don't do that. You might fall over and hurt yourself.
Yeah, it's very different. So I started to grow things on the side, and then a radio host here who's got some success said, hey, come do that full time. I'll show you how to do it. And so that was a kind of another do-over. And then I stayed there 3 years, wrote a couple of more books, and then really felt like I'm teaching people to do big, brave decisions, and I'm not making my own. And so I wanted to not just write about being an entrepreneur, but also actually be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So I definitely left my greatest shot at fame and popularity. But over time, those just aren't the things that matter the most to me. And so I had to make some tough decisions, and I learned a ton at that opportunity and still speak very highly of it. But it was, when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, man. And, I feel like you wrote the book that I wanted to write because I went through a similar sort of, I suppose, tangent in my career where I spent a few years in the corporate world, then started a web startup, and then started this consultancy where I am writing books and keynote speaking and hosting podcasts and all that sort of stuff. I was like, man, so many corporates out there that are saying, hey, I want to jump out of this world, but, I'm too scared. I don't know quite where to start and all that sort of stuff. I should write a book about this. And then we're researching some guests for the podcast. Yours came up. I'm like, man, this guy wrote the book that I was thinking about writing. I don't need to write it anymore now, so you just saved me a bit of time.
That's funny. Yeah, and the thing, I'm kind of in the middle where I encourage a lot of people, if they've got a great job, to see it as a great job. I tell people all the time, not everyone's supposed to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Like, you're not. And that's not a popular opinion. We we want to kind of chase the dream, but I think there are some great companies that are doing great things. And if you have a job at one of those, awesome. Like, accept that you're doing great work inside a big company. I'm very much against the entrepreneur myth of like, you're not really doing good work if you're at a big company. I think that's really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and I was having this same conversation yesterday, and we were talking about how a lot of people in large companies might read entrepreneur.com and everything else, and they might think that the grass is so much greener on the other side. Become an entrepreneur, be your own boss, all that sort of stuff. But unbeknownst to many people, it is about 100 times harder than anything inside a large company. And just to get someone to give you $1, as we were talking about earlier when it came to book sales, is not easy.
No, I love when people say, I want to be an entrepreneur so I can have as many vacation days as I want. Like, that's ridiculous. If you're not working, you're not earning. Now, granted, you can get to a place where you got passive income, that whole thing. But for the most part, yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah, very much so. And I look at my own sort of career trajectory, and I would have gladly stayed in the corporate world if some opportunities were made available to create and get involved with more innovative projects and whatnot. And I see a lot more companies are starting to do that, at least in the space that we're working in. So if those opportunities are made available, if there's meaning behind your work, if you're getting paid reasonably well, you're enjoying the people you're hanging out with, I see no reason why one would jump across and say, hey, I need to become an entrepreneur.
Well, and being an entrepreneur is super lonely if you're not careful. Like, nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Like, you go from being surrounded by people, like at lunch, you have 10 people going, hey, we're all going to this place, and you go together and you have community, and it just happens organically. When you're an entrepreneur and you're sitting at home, like, you have to fight and push and strain to have community.
Yeah.
So there's awesome stuff associated with it, definitely. But there's also the reality behind it that I think it's smart for people to explore before they jump.
And that loneliness is a great segue, John. I know when you ran your first event, something like 9 or 10 years ago, I think you brought 500 stickers to hand out. And this is something that totally resonates with me. 500 stickers to hand out, but only 2 people came. So I guess on disrupting yourself, it can feel lonely. So given that your first event was obviously a overwhelming success, what kind of conversations were you having with yourself at the time, internally?
Well, fortunately, I knew that people can relate to hard moments. Like, I knew that people have a harder time relating to success than they do failure. Everyone's failed, not everyone's succeeded. And so, fortunately, in that moment, I had my friend take a photo of me sitting with all these empty chairs and all these snacks, and I wrote a blog post about it, and it was my most popular blog post that year because it was honest. So I always tell people, this too shall post. The phrase is this too shall pass. But I'm a big believer that when you have a situation like that, when you're ready, like, you don't have to do it instantly if you haven't processed it yet. But like, for me, I was like, all right, like, that one was a failure. But like, if you're a real estate agent and you have an open house in America, there's a lot of times where you bring cookies for 100 people and nobody shows up, and you have to carry the cookies back to the car and like this walk of shame. And so I knew the story was relatable. So I kind of moved into like, yeah, it was frustrating. It was a little embarrassing, but it's relatable and I can really share this. How do I share that? And so I don't like when leaders tell you stories from 30 years ago that no longer are connected to them, or they only tell you their successes. Like, I hate a fake leader that it's just an award show of like, and here's another right decision I made. I'd much rather hear like, and here was something that was really hard. Here's something I did wrong. Here's an opportunity I just missed. And so that's what I went into that mode of like, okay, I'm not the only one who's had this happen. Let me see what other people think. And that was helpful.
Yeah, and that vulnerability really does help build rapport with an audience.
Oh, totally. And it's, it's not, you don't use it as a weapon. You don't use it to manipulate. You just use it as like, this is a true thing that happened to me. Has it happened to you too? And people come out of the woodwork to go, oh yeah, me too. That totally happened to me. And here's what I did with mine. And it's actually really cathartic.
Yeah. And you mentioned you had a friend turn up who took a photo. How important is it to have some kind of a support network or to seek permission, say, from your significant other when you are going on these sort of career trajectories? Oh,
yeah. The worst thing you can do is pitch your career goal against your spouse. And this happens constantly. And so what'll happen is the husband will have like a crazy idea, and it's like his 50th crazy idea. And he goes to the wife and goes, "This is my idea." And she asks questions, and he interprets the questions as an attack and says, "Why don't you believe in me?" And all of a sudden she's on the defensive, and it just falls apart. So I'm a much bigger believer in saying, "Hey, I've got this idea. I'd love to talk to you about it. I don't need any feedback yet or any questions. Like, I just want to share it with you. I'm just trying to brainstorm. Can we talk about it?" But I also think it's important to have people outside of your house that you talk to. Like, your spouse isn't supposed to necessarily be your only business partner. Like, my wife Jenny is very involved in my business, but I don't talk to her about every decision. She'd get overwhelmed, and she'd hate that if I was saying, "Hey, there's this thing coming up. I wanted to run it by you." But when you're an entrepreneur and you lose your team, you often make your spouse your team, even if they didn't sign up for it. So about a year ago, my wife was like, "I'm out of here. I'm not going to be part of the business. Like, I want to be your wife. I'm awesome at being your wife. I'm not going to be, your partner in this." And that was great. And it forced me to go, okay, well, I need an assistant, and I need an internet guy, and I need to expand. So you have to be really careful.
And I know in your case, I mean, you've got a couple of young daughters. Obviously, you're married. When you decided to make that jump and say, "Look, I'm going to go full steam ahead with this," did you already have some income coming in from that side hustle?
No, I mean, I had a situation where I couldn't work for 6 months as part of okay, this is my, my non-compete. So I couldn't. It would have been dishonest of me to my employer to have stuff lined up, What I did have was I had a big platform. I had savings, I had a financial runway. So when the myth is people might look at me and go, "What a risk taker, what a daredevil." Not at all, dude.
Yeah.
I planned and I was careful, and I honored the company that I worked for, and I didn't try to burn the bridge. I tried to do my best. So, I mean, once that period was over, I was ready to rock and roll. Granted, I had some stuff that was ready then. I didn't start fresh then. I had been having conversations. But yeah, so I think you need to have, especially if you have a family. I mean, you give people advice you'd give a 22-year-old college grad who doesn't have college loans, maybe doesn't have a mortgage, doesn't have kids, doesn't have a wife, is different from what you'd say to a 38-year-old with 2 kids, a mortgage, and a wife, or a husband. So yeah, but I think you need some runway.
Yeah, 100%. I had a conversation with Jenny Blake, who wrote the book Pivot, about 6 months ago.
Yeah, I endorsed that book.
Yeah, great book. And she says something very similar. I mean, when she left Google to embark upon her own sort of journey, she had 6 months runway to work with. And she had no idea what she was doing, but she had enough time to figure it out and support herself. And you know what? If worse came to worse, she could always go back to either Google or other companies with her experience under her belt. And I think a lot of people think that, hey, if I do jump out, is that career suicide? But, taking 6 months out of work is not really career suicide. And if you're working for an organization who doesn't support that and doesn't want to take you back, then perhaps that's not the kind of company you want to be spending your time at, right? Yeah.
Totally. A sign of a healthy culture is if somebody can work there again. A really unhealthy company will look at you leaving as betrayal or disloyalty, and will say, "You're dead to me," and they kind of excommunicate you. So, but the thing, I had a friend say to me, he said, "John, if I lost my job, would you bet against me that I wouldn't have another job within a week or two?" And he was right. This guy hustles, he's smart, he's hungry. And so if you're already that way, even if things didn't work out, I could figure it out. Yeah. And, I told a 27-year-old the other day that's thinking about moving to LA, I said, if you try a 2-year LA experiment and it doesn't work, you come back to Nashville, you're 29. You still have so much life we sometimes think, we forget that, oh yeah, that's right. I could, a 22-year-old could do a 2-year experiment, come back and they're 24. You still have so much time,
Yeah, but I guess that's part of the whole paradox of life, right? When you're 22, you think you know everything. But when you're 29, it's different, right?
You feel invincible, to a degree.
Yeah, and you feel like you're so old, right? Because you spend every day we spend our lives looking forward until we're 70, and then we're like, oh, life's kind of past now. But you're looking forward to 22, you've already been through your teens, like, man, I'm so old now. And it's not until you're like 30, you're like, wow, 22, you're really young. But anyway, that's a perception thing. So in your book, John, you argue that there are 4 things that will eventually happen to us in our careers. Do you mind quickly running through those 4 things?
Sure, yeah. One is you'll hit a ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll climb a ladder and find yourself stuck. So that might be, my personal ceiling was I worked at a company and I was a senior content designer, which was their fancy title for writer. Mm-hmm. And there was no super duper senior content designer. There was no rung for me to go above that. So whether I liked it or not, I was stuck and I had to change. The second thing that'll happen is you'll experience a bump. Something bad outside of your control will happen. And for example, in Nashville where I live, every musician friend of mine has had to reinvent their entire career because albums no longer sell.
Yeah, you got a tour.
Yep, 20 years ago, the tour was to support the album. Mm-hmm. Now, the album is to support the tour.
Yeah.
So they went through a bump. On the positive side of things, there's 2 positive things. There's one which I call a jump, which is where you make a positive decision to change your life in a good way. So you apply for another job, you move to a city, you talk to a mentor, you take a class, you do something positive that's on purpose. And then the last one is a positive kind of unexpected moment where an opportunity you didn't see coming presents itself and you get to kind of work on it and dream about it. So it's really, and most people will go through all 4 of those in every average day. Like some of your listeners right now would say, oh, I'm stuck in this one area, but I just had a jump moment with a vendor, or I had a bump moment at work. Like a bump could just be the guy that hired you and loved you and fought for you is no longer at the company, and suddenly you're really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that happens every day in corporations. Well, so those are kind of the 4.
Yeah, it happens in business too when you've got a particular sponsor at a client or a prospect, and they suddenly say, hey, I'm actually leaving, and it kind of leaves you very, very vulnerable. So again, something that jumping over to entrepreneurship won't make you immune to. But on those 4 areas, obviously the frequency at which these are occurring in today's climate, especially when technology is just displacing so many jobs, is getting shorter and shorter. It's becoming more common. So, but it feels as if people generally, at least in Australia, are ill-equipped to respond to these changes and, hitting a career ceiling, wanting to make a jump, and so on. So what sort of insights or resources does your book provide people who are thinking about making that career jump, say?
Yeah, well, a big part of it is recognizing what they already have. Mm-hmm. We have the hardest time recognizing our own skills and our own talents. And not only do we not recognize them, we tend to overvalue other people's and undervalue our own. We go, oh, that's just something I do. Everybody does that. And you go, no, that's unique. That's something somebody would hire you for. So a big part of it is helping people figure out, okay, currently, what skills do I have? What skills do I need to add? Mm-hmm. Currently, what relationships do I have? What relationships, can I lean on? I like to say relationships get you the first job and skills get you the second. Mm-hmm. In a lot of jobs, it's going to be a friend who vets you, who says, I know Cheryl, she's awesome. And then the company goes, okay, we love Kathy. She said you're awesome, Cheryl, come on in. Now, Cheryl has to be great. She still needs skills. Like, you can't show up and suck. But the book really helps you kind of in a practical, fun way say, okay, what am I good at? Who do I know? What's my network look like? If you ask most people, name 50 people that could help you with a job, they can name 5 to 10. But through the exercises, you always end up going, oh my gosh, I know more people than I thought, or I have more skills than I thought. So I think that's a big part of what the book does.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned number 1 there was recognizing what you're good at. And it aligns with what people like, I suppose, Tony Robbins would say, where, forget about your weaknesses and addressing them. Otherwise, you're just going to bring yourself up to everyone else's level. What are you really good at? What are your strengths? Work on leveraging those, because that's where you can really shine.
Exactly. And again, sometimes it's we feel bad recognizing our strengths. The internet has really ruined us to be like, we don't celebrate. I can't stand the phrase humble brag. I don't know if you ever see that in Australia, but in America, if I tweeted, I can't wait to go do this thing, somebody go, oh, it's a humble brag. Like, why are you showing off? Like, so we're allowed to be depressed and like moan. We're not allowed to be excited. So often we push down what we're good at, or we feel embarrassed by it. And so I really feel like you miss so much of life when you do that.
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm definitely guilty of the humble brag, particularly, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Oh, about to speak in front of X number of people at this conference. Can't wait. Going to be fun. But yeah, I can see how that kind of thing may be ill-received by certain sections of society.
Yeah, but for me, like, who cares about those people? They're not my audience.
Exactly.
Like, today, right before this call, I tweeted, I'm going to speak to Lockheed Martin. Can't wait. Because they're a massive 100,000 person company. Mm-hmm. Like, that is dope that I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And I do stuff like that because, one, I want to thank them for letting me do that. I just told 280,000 people about them. Two, I want other big companies to go, oh, man, that guy speaks to big companies. We should have him at our company. So, yeah, whenever somebody says, oh, that was a humble brag, I usually say, no, it was a brag. It should have been stronger. I'll go harder next time if you thought I was trying to be humble. Like, I wasn't. I was being excited, and there's a difference.
Yeah, exactly. And that just speaks volumes about your personality, and you want to be engaging. You want to project that sort of positivity rather than just like hiding away in your corner and not saying anything unless it's going to hurt someone's feelings and so on. So, but you mentioned
the other thing, just real quick, the other thing you have to realize is that a lot of people think the internet's about them. It's not about them. Mm-hmm. Like, I posted, for instance, hey, ran a couple miles. It was at a slow pace, blah, 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 blah. And somebody's like, it's not slower than mine. You really shouldn't say that. I run slower than that. That insults me. And I didn't know they existed before they commented on the photo. And I didn't sit down and go, want to make sure that Patty in Ohio knows I'm faster. Like, it wasn't about them. Yeah. So you have to understand there's so many people that think the internet's about them, and it's not about them. And if that frustrates it, like, how, what am I supposed to say? Like a disclaimer where I go, hey, I ran this time, which for me was personally slow, but I know a lot of you run slower times, and I want to go ahead and apologize if I made you feel, upset. Like, I want to, like, I hope this doesn't hurt anybody's feet. Like, that's the worst.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You've got different customer segments for different people. If people don't like what you're writing, they can just go jog on, as the English would say, and go somewhere else. So, but you did say a few seconds ago, you've got a huge following on Twitter, something like 280,000 people. So building a personal brand obviously does help open doors, whether it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on, having that big social presence, obviously writing books, keynoting, etc. Do you unpack any sort of advice in the book around building that personal brand, whether the importance of it or how to actually do it?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing from a personal branding perspective, a lot of personal branding is character. And one of the 4 things I detail in the book is, understanding the role character plays in your ability to get great jobs. Often character, like when somebody says, I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about that candidate I really like. That's them speaking about character without even knowing it. Yeah. So I talk a lot about how do you deliberately build your character. I definitely don't go into here's how you build Twitter, here's how you build Instagram, in part because the second you write a book about Instagram, it's out of date. Yeah. And they change the algorithm and everything is upside down. So I think that web resources work well for that. It's hard to write a book from my perspective that has longevity. Yeah.
Well, it's
in the social media space.
Yeah, it's a bit like the education system in many ways, where a 4-year university degree is losing its relevance because by the time you're done, most of what you learned is redundant. Whereas, short courses, online courses and so on, you can learn while things are relevant in bite-sized chunks, similar to blogs versus books these days. And, if you're writing a book about technology, like you said, Instagram, hey, who knows if Instagram will still be around in a couple of years' time. Snapchat might completely dominate that market, or something else might come along and just take Snapchat's market share away. Who knows?
What if you had written a book about Vine?
Yeah.
Like if you had been like, here's how to use Vine. And Vine doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, glad I didn't put all my eggs in that basket.
Exactly. And, you look at some of the Vine stars, like, what was his name? Logan Paul. He's obviously moved on and started to disrupt himself and get into short feature films and things like that. But that's a smart move, and it's important for a lot of people who are out there and, social media starlets and vloggers and everything else that's going on these days to realize that, hey, this particular platform may not exist forever. So what else can I be doing to shield myself from this potential disruption?
Yeah, I mean, and may not, like, other than Facebook, which is so entrenched in our lives, it's really hard to think of a platform that will exist, for the next 30 years.
Yeah. Don't say that.
It's just challenging.
Yeah, especially with the new emerging tech coming along. I mean, you've got your augmented reality, virtual reality, which has applications across so many fields, including social and how we connect online and everything else. So that will just open up the door to so many new companies to come in and play ball.
Sure,
yeah.
No doubt.
Yep. Cool. So I think in your book you mentioned that 70% of people feel dissatisfied or disengaged with their jobs. And I guess that's why this is so important right now. And we talked about a couple of things that people should consider when making a jump, which is, recognize your strengths, identify your relationships. But what else should they be thinking about in order to not feel dissatisfied in their next role?
Well, I mean, I think a big part of it is what can you still learn at the company you're at? For instance, I was at a company in Atlanta and I felt a little stuck. And so I went and applied to every leadership program they had, like every kind of class they had, every team they had. And it was funny, I got put on one where I was the only person not in customer service. Like it was really a program for customer service, but they were so taken aback that I applied that they said, yeah, sure, come on. And I learned so much about serving people from those people. And so, a big part of it is making the best use of what you have when you're at a company. The second thing I'd say is starting to explore things on the free time of your life. I mean, people tell me, I want to be a writer. And I'll say, well, do you write in the morning before work? Do you write at night after work? Do you write on the weekends? Do you read books about writing? And if they say no to those things, I say, well, you don't want to be a writer. You just like the word writer.
Yeah.
So really starting to invest in small ways. Okay, wow, I want to make bath bombs and sell them online. Okay, well, just read a book about building an online site. Like read 5 blog posts about selling health and beauty products on the internet. Take some exploration. And then a big part of it is, what do you enjoy doing? Like, okay, I want people to think, okay, what % of me is actually being used at this company? And be honest with yourself. Like, is it 5%? Is it 50? And then I want them to go, okay, but there's 30 other in this other department that I could do if I was just brave enough to apply for this job.
Yeah.
Or if I was, if I spent a year working on this thing. So I really want people, I think that's part of how you get out of being stuck. And then the other thing I'd say is it's critical to talk to friends. Often when you're stuck, you can't really see the situation. It's like the friend who has a bad dating relationship. Like he's got a girl that just really treats him poorly, and he can't see it until he's out of it. But his friends can see it. If he stopped for a second and said, hey, be honest with me. Like, no, I won't be frustrated. I won't be mad. What do you think of Megan? And his friends say, well, she doesn't care about you. She puts you last in her life. And he would go, whoa, I didn't see that, because it's almost like you're standing so close to a painting you can't see it.
Yeah.
So what I would say to somebody stuck is go talk to a friend and say, hey, I feel stuck at work. It's that accurate. And they might go, you know what? This is the 5th company you felt stuck at. It might be you that needs to work on stuff.
Yeah.
Or they might go, you feel stuck because your boss is abusive and it's time for you to do something about it. Or, they might go, you have one of the best jobs in the world. I worked at a company where, this is probably 10 years ago, they gave us an orange iPod Shuffle because our company colors were orange as a gift. And I remember a girl I worked with said, what an ugly color. And I wanted to say, are you out of your mind? They gave us a free iPod Shuffle. But she had forgotten how great the company was. So in that situation, she wasn't stuck. She was just being ungrateful and entitled. And so I feel like a friend can expose that in a kind way.
Yeah, and it's the whole thing where if someone comes to you with your problems, you'll sort that person out really quickly, right? But it's often hard to make those decisions ourselves.
We can't give ourselves advice.
Yeah.
Like, It's really hard to give yourself objective advice. We can lie to ourselves like nobody else. Like when somebody goes, why did you make that decision? The answer is because I thought it would be good. Like I didn't think it would be bad, and I made it in a vacuum. And I wish I had known,
Yeah, well, emotion clouds judgment, as Socrates used to say, and that's why it's important to have a healthy dose of self-awareness, or have a good support network around you of people who you actually listen to and don't just disregard whatever they say. And I really like that story you told about the orange iPod as well. It reminds me of a story from, I think it's Unshakable. I think it's Tony Robbins' book, where he's on a plane and he's talking about how he used to fly Qantas all the time, and then eventually, he started flying private jet. But on his last Qantas plane, he's sitting there, and the reason why he started flying private was so he could access the internet, because he didn't want to fly from LA to Melbourne 14 hours, not have access to the internet, and manage his 22 companies. And then on his last flight on Qantas, the pilot announces, Qantas is pleased to announce that we now have Wi-Fi on the plane. Everyone's cheering and they're all super pumped, and then within like 10 minutes, what happens? The Wi-Fi breaks down and everyone's really pissed, and it takes like 10 minutes for everyone to think, wow, this is a miracle, we've got the internet on the plane, to everyone thinking it's an expectation. And that story you told about the orange iPod, I was like, wow, it's people just can have that sense of entitlement just so quickly when someone should just be grateful. Hey, they're giving us free iPods, this is cool.
Yeah, it doesn't take long. Entitlement is very fast.
Yeah. So one of the other ideas you talk about in the book is the importance of having an advocate. And I guess this kind of ties into what we were just talking about now, where and it really resonates with me as a CEO of a small company. I really need to get that 360-degree feedback from people, whether it's anonymous, whether it's named, on a monthly basis. And for me, it's been a super powerful source of personal improvement, and just an opportunity to improve my leadership qualities and make sure that people are having a great time at work and that they're being their best. So do you have any advice for, I suppose, leaders of organizations, whether they're startups or larger organizations, when it comes to this concept of an advocate?
Yeah, my big thing is find somebody 10 years ahead of you and 10 years behind you. The person 10 years ahead of you, find somebody who's doing the kind of things you want to do. And it doesn't mean they're 10 years older. Like if you're a 35-year-old who is a dentist, somebody who's been a dentist for 10 years longer, can teach you a lot.
Yeah.
And now somebody 10 years younger, I say to learn, because they're seeing the world in a different way than you are, and they're going to expose you to new technologies, new approaches, new cultural shifts. So I think it goes both ways. But really just the idea of like, wow, that person has the kind of life I want to have. Let me buy them a coffee. I think the mistake we make is it's like dating. We try to get married on the first date. We email a stranger and say, hey, I really like you. Will you be my mentor for the rest of your life until we both die, and we'll be buried at the same cemetery? And like, oh my gosh, the people you're going to look up to are busy.
Yeah. And
like James Altucher, this guy over here, always says like, mentors don't need your $4 coffee. They have coffee. So like when the phrase, I want to pick your brain, I'll buy you coffee. Like, I make more than $6 an hour. Like that's a terrible, I would much rather, the best approach sometimes is to say, hey, I'd love to grab coffee with you. I know you're super busy. So in the meantime, can you just recommend one book I should read? And then they recommend a book. And then this is the crazy part. You read that book. And then 3 weeks later, you send them a short email that says, hey, thanks so much for the book recommendation. Here are the 3 things I learned. You got anything else? And you start to show value. Like my father-in-law helps run a multi-billion-dollar company. And when people say to him all the time, hey, I want you to mentor me, he'll say, great, let's meet at 5:30 at this coffee shop near my office. And if they go, it's really early, the traffic will be bad, can we do it somewhere else or somewhere later? He knows if they won't make that sacrifice, they won't listen to any else of his advice. So the key to finding an advocate is often flexibility. It's your job to bend around their schedule and their convenience.
Yeah, and I've heard a couple people take that approach where they say, look, if someone wants to meet with me, let's meet nice and early, 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning. Let's see if they're serious. And most people just aren't willing to make the commitment. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about, hey, I want to be a writer. And, well, do you write? Do you write as little as 100 words a day? Well, no. I mean, I can't, only write when inspiration strikes kind of thing. And I think there's a quote on that where I only write when inspiration strikes, but I see to it that it strikes at 9 a.m. every day, right? It becomes habitual. But yeah, people have got to put their money where their mouth is.
Well, and often if I tweet something like, there's great opportunities for, like I'll tweet, dear college grads, don't sweat the news. There's always great jobs for great employees, which I 100% believe. And then if somebody's first response is to tell me, you don't know where I live, or you don't know if they give me a litany of excuses, like the game's already over.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying, and they're easy to get, and I'm not saying, and you won't have to sacrifice. Like, yeah, you might be right. Like if you live in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, guess what? You might have to move to Omaha to find an opportunity. Like that's like those are the breaks.
But you always have that choice to move to Omaha or anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the great thing about living in a free country is that. I will say my books, I've heard other authors say this, the books are really for people that have these amazing freedoms we have. Like it is amazing that you and I get to do stuff like this. It is awesome that our economy is set up this way. It is awesome that we have leaders that will encourage us. There's a lot of countries where you're born into a situation that's almost impossible to escape. And so more so than not, we should say, wow, what a benefit we have. I should really take advantage of it.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think, obviously a lot of people realize that, but there's still so many others who I feel quick to make excuses, don't believe in the possibilities that we have. And today, you mentioned the podcast. The barriers to entry for most things today are just lower than ever. Go back 10 years, 15 years, starting something like a podcast, you would have had to have the most state-of-the-art equipment, you would have needed to have a marketing team, distribution, all sorts of stuff, and you still probably wouldn't have reached anywhere near as the amount of people that can just log onto iTunes today and listen to us riff for 60 minutes or so. And the opportunities are there. But I think, it's Robert Kiyosaki from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, gold's everywhere, but people aren't trained to see it. And I think that's a big part of what is important with books like yours, podcasts like this. It's about just opening people's eyes to the opportunities.
Yeah, and I think, and opening the eyes that it's not just for special people.
Yeah.
Or it's not just for like wildly talented people. I was terrible the first time I gave a speech. But I'm, 400 speeches later, it's a lot better and it's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
But that first one, and I don't mean like the first one was bad and the second one was great. Not at all.
No way.
There were a lot of bad ones. I didn't have to be special. I just had to work hard.
Yeah, and it's about not wanting to be perfect from day one, just appreciating, hey, I'm probably gonna suck, but anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you can do it well, right? So, hey, if it takes me 50 talks to get to a reasonable level of competence public speaking, then so be it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. That's why, I gave talks for free. I gave talks, at small places. There were so many different things that I just said, okay, I have to do it this way. And that's, I can't wait to someday get paid for it, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Fantastic. And before I move on, just wanted to touch on something you mentioned around the mentors, and it kind of stuck out for me because when I think about mentors and when I've given people advice, I say, look, it's great to have a mentor, 10, 20 years older, but just be wary that when they built their business, even though it might be in the same space as yours, the technological climate, the way you go about marketing and sales and everything else was quite different. So don't just take everything they say as gospel. And that's why it's important to have someone 10 years younger than you who gets all the tech trends coming along and what could be disrupting your business.
Oh, yeah, 100%, because they're going to be able to – it creates a balance where you're able to say, okay, yeah, and the other thing I'd say is the reason I like advocate is that mentor feels like one and advocate can be many. I am of the belief you need a team approach. So it might be that a business guy who's amazing and you want to get business feedback, but he's not married. So you're not going to get marriage advice from him. But then you know somebody who's got an amazing marriage, but he doesn't have the kind of business you do. So you shouldn't get business advice. So I'm a much bigger believer in treating it like a basketball. We started with basketball, recognizing, wow, the center is really good at blocks. That's where I'll go for blocks. Oh, the point guard is really fast and can bring the ball up the court. I'll go to the point guard for that. Just recognizing that it takes more than one point of feedback.
Yeah, you got to have a team around you. And before we jump into our lightning round, John, I know you recently published on Twitter, and this is back to Instagram now, 5 rules you gave your 13-year-old daughter when she joined Instagram. I thought this would be something interesting for our audience, particularly the parents listening, to hear about. So what can you tell us about those 5 rules?
Well, I mean, we do have a daughter. Like, I think the first thing, the biggest thing I learned was that she was going to get a phone earlier than I thought. I think that parents, you just made the point that sometimes you got to make sure a mentor isn't stuck in the old way.
Yeah.
I was stuck in the old way. I was very much of the attitude of she'll get a phone when she's 16 and, you know, she can do it then and that'll be great. And friends can call her on the house phone. That's just not reality. Like, that's not how things are anymore. So I really had to step back and say, okay, what is my daughter really like? How does her friends really interact? And the big thing, to tell you the truth, was she's in a small group from church, and she was the only one that didn't. Have a phone. And so one day, my wife said, "Hey, I just wish our daughter wasn't on the outside of all these encouraging, you know, texts that they send to each other all week." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Oh, well, she misses all those. Like, she doesn't get to be part of that because she doesn't have a phone." And it hit me, wow. As a parent, if you look at the internet as this evil monster that's trying to kidnap your child, like, you're doomed. Like, if you look at it as a great tool they can use, you're in a much better place. So the rules we came up with were, 1, the account stays private. We are cool with her using it to connect with people she knows, not build a platform as a 13-year-old. Like, you don't need to send your kid to the wolves of the internet. 2, the passwords are shared. We know her passwords. And occasionally parents will tell me, "Oh, my kid won't let me follow him, or he won't give me his password." And I think, unless he's paying for rent and that phone, that's your phone. Like, it'd be the equivalent of if you came home and your son had installed locks on his bedroom door. You would laugh, and then you would remove the door and say, like, hey, you don't live in an apartment. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but this is not how we do things. Number 3, only friends can follow her. So she'll tell us, "Hey, this person wants to follow me. I know them from school." And we'll go, "Great, that's awesome." Number 4, private information stays private. You'd be shocked at the number of kids who will post, "Hey, here's my phone number. Here's my address." Kids in America will post their driver's license and, like, "Look what I just got." And it's really dangerous. And then simple things like, we don't post bathing suit photos. Like, I wish we lived in a world where a 13-year-old could not worry about that, but that, you know, you do have to worry about that. And you'd be shocked. We just had in our town, some kids got in trouble for sexting, and a boy got kicked out of school. And in America, they charge you with child pornography. So you, as a 9th grader, can make a mistake that will stay with you for the rest of your life. And that list, the sex offenders list that you get put on, doesn't distinguish. So it doesn't say, made a mistake as a 9th grader. So that kid can't pick up his kids 30 years later from school because he has to stay 500 yards away from a school. So, like, when I tell parents, like, you got to be active, that's the stuff.
Wow.
Like, you'd be shocked.
That's nuts. I mean, that rule, when I think child pornography and everything else, I think, you know, an adult, I wouldn't have thought that would apply to a 9th grader.
Oh, yeah. So, and who knows if they'll distinguish that in the future. But right now, if a 15-year-old asks his girlfriend, "Send me a nude photo," that's technically considered child pornography.
Wow.
Because it's a nude photo of a minor. And so, when I'm not a doom and gloom guy, because I think the internet is awesome and I've benefited so much from it. And I want my kids to leave the house with, like, I want them to be dominating social media when they leave our house, because it's going to be with them for the rest of their life. But on the other end, I'm not a parent who's casual and goes, "It's not a big deal, like, whatever, anything," you know. They're like, They'll handle themselves. Like, no, they won't.
Yeah, well, I mean, a tool is only as good as how you can use it. And as a parent, you can play that role in influencing your kids to best make use of those tools and not abuse them. And, I grew up in an Eastern European family along with a lot of my friends. And, when we were in our mid-teens, our parents insisted that we have a drink with them at home. So we learned how to drink because we were going to go out anyway, when we were 16, 17 and have drinks. But you're better off understanding, how alcohol responds to your body, or how your body responds to alcohol, rather than just going out and saying, oh, what's this big bottle? What's this Jack Daniels? All right, I'll just have a massive swig of this. And before you know it, you're lying on the ground unconscious, right?
Yeah. That's funny.
Cool. So before we jump into our lightning round, John, the last question I had was on your podcast. I know you've got a podcast in the works. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it'll probably launch in June or July, and I'm going to do an 8-episode season. And it's going to be conversations, maybe some short kind of news bits, music, that kind of thing. But I'm really curious about ultimately having a conversation about the chances we take and the ones that we don't. And so the first guest is going to be a guy named Brian Koppelman, who's the co-creator of the show called Billions on Showtime with Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis, and just a brilliant guy and somebody who I've looked up to creatively for a long time. And so he's going to be the first guest. There's going to be, I think, a couple comedians. And so it's just a chance to explore conversations with people. And then it's not just going to be famous people. I think one of the guests is going to be this MMA trainer who trained Chuck Liddell, who's one of the world's most famous MMA fighters. But he's just got a really interesting story about growing up in Hawaii and dealing with racism, and just a fascinating guy. Now he's a business owner, and now he's trying to teach kids how to protect themselves from bullying. Awesome. So he's just a multifaceted guy. And so that's the goal of it. And again, probably June or July. And it's something I wanted to do for a long time because I like to talk to people. I just haven't made it a priority until recently.
Awesome. Well, do let us know when that goes live, and we'll share that with the Future Squared audience.
Thanks.
Awesome, man. Cool. It's time for our 3-question lightning round, John. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Sure.
Let's do it. So question number 1, and I always hesitate asking this to entrepreneurs, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you could work for any company at any stage of the company life cycle, so we could be going back to the 18th century if we wanted to, who would it be and why?
I think Comedy Central would be really fun to work for. I went and spoke to their team. And they're on the cusp of a lot of exciting things as they figure out the digital space, as they've had a huge hit with Trevor Noah. They're expanding to international markets because of his presence. So they're in New York City, which would be fun to live in. I think that, or if I couldn't do that, I'd try to work for a publisher like Penguin, who publishes my books, because you get to be around so many interesting, funny characters and art and books, and I think I just love that.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned in one of your blog posts recently that your publisher was really pushing you and asking you questions and cutting stuff out that just didn't fit, and you felt like it really pushed you to become a better writer.
Yeah, that's why when people say self-publishing is the future and the gatekeepers are gone, sometimes they think the editor was a gatekeeper. The editor is your best friend. And my editor cut 23,000 words out of the book. Wow. So, and you have, that takes time and trust, and you have to know that they're amazing. But on Do Over, the editor, the book she did before mine was Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. And so she's one of the best editors in the world. Like, the publisher discovered Jim Collins and edited Good to Great. So that guy's giving me advice. And so, of course, you listen to that guy. But I think working in that environment would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it doesn't get too much bigger than Jim Collins when it comes to the personal development and business books. Question number 2, John, is if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
I think I'm a Christian, so I think I have to, by law, say Jesus. But aside from that, dead or alive? I think I'd go alive. I'm trying to, who I'd ask? I'd ask like Justin Timberlake or Taylor Swift business questions, because they've both brilliantly built brands. Like that would be my dream event, is if, like, and we've seen Taylor Swift a couple times in concerts. My daughters love her, but she's a very, very, very smart business person, and has very deliberately shifted her brand from country to pop to expand it. So like that would just be fascinating. I'd just be curious about that from a personal branding. And Justin Timberlake's the same way. I mean, he's one of the few humans on the planet that survived being in a boy band. Like you have to, and he took a long hiatus from music. Like you have to respect that. So those would be two people that'd be fascinating to talk to.
Yeah, it's funny going back and seeing those early photos of JT when he had his peroxide blonde hair. It's
almost like ramen noodle.
Yeah, almost irrecognizable. And on being a Christian, I know you wrote I guess, should we call it a satirical book called Stuff Christians Like? Yeah. Can you tell us anything about that? I mean, I haven't done too much research on that, but it seems quite interesting.
Yeah, it was just all the funny things that Christians do in church. And so like an example would be wishing you could wear a shirt that said, "I direct deposit my tithe to Sunday." Because on Sunday, I ignore the offering and it looks like, man, I must hate Jesus, but I just give online. So it's just a joke about like your whole row is judging you. And it'd be great if you could be like, look at my shirt, I give online, still love Jesus. So the book was an exploration of all the funny things we do in faith. Yeah. And the fortunate thing for me is there's not a lot of comedy in the Christian space. Like, unfortunately, Christians aren't known for being funny. And so I was able to launch that book kind of into a vacuum. Now, there's certainly a lot more people doing it now, almost 10 years later. But at the time, it was kind of unique, which was exciting.
Awesome, man. Love it. And lucky last question.
You guys in Australia, it's like Hillsong is gigantic, right? Isn't that like Australia has a huge church called Hillsong?
Yeah, Hillsong. I'm not familiar with it. I'll check it out after the show, man. Cool. So the last question for the show is, and it's all about getting into the heads of high performers. I ask everyone this question. It is, do you have any rituals or routines to help you stay on top of your game? I mean, you just pumped out your 5th book, you're a keynote speaker, you're doing a lot of travel, inspiring people all around the world, about to start a podcast. How does Jonathan Acuff stay on top of his game?
Yeah, and my 6th book will actually come out this fall.
Well, there you go.
Which I'm excited about. No, I mean, I think a big part for me is exercise. If I'm not exercising, my stress levels go up. I feel stuck. I feel lethargic. So for me, I have to have things like I'm running a half marathon in a week from now.
Awesome.
Like I need that on the calendar. I do Fitbit. I have a Fitbit watch that tracks my steps, and I compete with other people. And kind of being competitive about that helps. But yeah, for me, and then also sleeping. Like, a bunch of these faux entrepreneurs are always like, sleep when you're dead, hustle 24/7. That's garbage.
Yeah.
That's how you become a workaholic with ulcers and get divorced.
Exactly.
Like, so for me, a nap, sleep, and I think the last thing would be having fun and having fun rewards. Like when I turned in my latest book, I bought ski boots because I wanted to go skiing. And when you rent ski boots, they're like torture chambers for your feet. And it wasn't crazy expensive, and I could have bought them at any point, but I made it a condition of like, when I turn this in, that's going to be fun, and I'm going to do that. And then I went skiing a couple times. Like, that was really, I think when you hustle so hard, sometimes you forget, like, you need to have some fun.
Yeah.
You need to enjoy. Like, otherwise, what's the point?
Well, that's
it's just
it.
making you miserable.
Yeah.
Like, you can go be miserable with less stress. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and there's so much out there now on biohacking this and productivity that, but ultimately it comes back to the fundamentals: sleep, exercise, eat well, play, laugh, hang out with family and friends. You do all those things, and you have balance between all those things, and you're going to be pretty happy.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, I don't get too crazy with it. Like, there's a lot of guys that's their jam, where it's like, I'm measuring my blood levels, and like that. If that's your thing, awesome.
Yeah.
But it's not one size fits all. Like it's pretty. Like I run and I sleep, and I try to have fun, and I don't work a ton in certain months. Like our summer is June and July, and so I'll only do like 2 speaking gigs a month, both of those months. Now October, September, it's go time. I'll do 6 a month, but I take the time. I took 5 weeks off last summer. Like to have fun. So
excellent. And what time are you shooting for with the half marathon?
I don't know. I did 1:59 last year, so I'm not
nice.
sure. Like under 2 is always a fun time.
Yeah.
But I've got some friends I'm running this one with, so I might just say my goal is to finish with my friends.
Yeah.
You know, versus I need to, because I also have to I got into ping pong or table tennis, and I hired a coach, and I was like doing all these crazy things, and my wife was like, I asked you to get a hobby because you're a workaholic, and you became a ping pong workaholic. You're not even having fun. So I'm the kind of guy, like a lot of entrepreneurs, that I have to be careful that I don't try to excel. It's okay to just enjoy it.
Yeah, don't try to double down on absolutely everything you do.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome, man. So the book is out. People can pick that up on Amazon and all places that good books are sold. They can find out a little bit more about it also at doover.me. They can find you at Acuff that's ACUFF.me. Obviously, you're on Twitter at Jon Acuff. Is there anywhere else people should go to find out a bit about you and connect?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I do something for entrepreneurs at acuff.me/business. It's called the Entrepreneurs List. So once a week, I send out an idea that's, a business lesson, something that I learned. And then I have one for writers, because there's a lot of people that want to write a book, and that's just acuff.me/writers. And they're kind of my ability to share ideas without writing a whole book. Like, I don't know if I'd ever write a whole book on how to be a writer, but I'll tell you exactly how much I made on my royalty, the first book I wrote, and why I made that, and how to figure out how to get you to there too. So I love that I get to be more intimate in email than I am in a blog post. A blog post will attract people that you don't even get into a conversation with, where an email, I know you've signed up for it, I know you're into it, and I know that I can get hyper nerdy on being an entrepreneur or being a writer, and you'll go along on the ride. So those are fun, free resources.
Awesome. Well, we'll share that in the show notes for our listeners. Thanks, Jonathan, so much for taking the time and being so gracious with your time to appear on Future Squared and speak to our listeners. You've been awesome, and hope you enjoy it.
You're the one that got up at 6 a.m. So my job, it's 3 o'clock here. My job was pretty easy.
Man,
you had the tough morning. So.
I got to let you in on a secret. The reason why I was 2 minutes late, I set my alarm for 5:15. I thought I'm going to get up at 5:15. I'm going to crank out some push-ups, drink a nice big, half liter of water. I'm going to be ready for this. And then, for whatever reason, I wake up, it's 10 to 6. My alarm completely, either I didn't set it properly, let's be honest. I don't buy it when people say my alarm didn't go off. I mustn't have set it properly. I got up at 5:50. I'm like, what? And literally, man, it was just a crazy rush to get to Skype, turn it on, everything's set. 6:02, and I'm playing it cool. I'm like, hey, man, how's it going?
It was fine. It was absolutely awesome. So I'm glad we were able to do it. I appreciate you letting me be on the show, and let me know when it's up. I'll tell my listeners.
Will do, man. Thanks again, John.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your weekend, dude.
You too, mate. Cheers. Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.